How's it going, Higher Side Chatters? Drinking a little drink, smoking a little smoke, and just trying to keep my head on straight in this crooked world. From sunny San Diego, I'm the guy who calls himself the Carlwood, and today we have my San Diego local, Mr. Crrow777. He's been here more than any other guest. He's 70% through the article series he's been writing for THC, and I figured it was time to check in with him once again. A major staple of the Higher Side Chats is examining the situation we find ourselves in and trying to get a deeper and more accurate understanding of it. How much of our learned thoughts and ideas are wrong, how much of our culture has been tainted by overlords looking for a desired result, how much of the tragedies we see on TV can be believed, and of course, how much of the mental picture we have of our planet, its environment, and its history can be trusted. Now that's a big one. But just in the few short months it's been, I think you'll hear Crow has been capturing many strange things in the sky, both near and far, that don't fit in with the big picture we've been presented with, and I find that pretty exciting. I hope you guys agree, and there's really only one way to find out, and that's doing the damn thing. So take it away, Charlie, and I'll see you guys with our eye in the sky, Crow himself, on the other side. Alright people, for quite some time now we've been exploring this idea that our seemingly natural experience of life could be a set of interlocking control mechanisms, from language to time to space itself, a pervasive ruse we call reality right up to the light at the end of the tunnel, and today we're going to re-examine the layers of the big conspiratorial playbook, unlock the gates to the mind prisons we've been institutionalized into, and hear the latest revelations from our Skywatcher extraordinaire, Crrow777. My friend and yours, Crow, welcome back. How the hell are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me, and welcome back to you. I heard you were away for a while.
That is true. Yeah, thanks. And it is great to talk to you again. We've done quite a series of shows at this point, but there's always more to discuss. In fact, today is Saturday, the 14th of November. We had originally planned to have this talk yesterday on Friday, the 13th, and it just so happens we have one of the biggest ISIS attacks so far go down in Paris. Some of these events taking place just a few blocks from where I was actually staying 2 weeks ago. But, I'm seeing a lot of people saying it's a completely simulated event. That I can't say. I haven't looked into it enough, but it definitely, I would say, is orchestrated from the top down. But maybe we should talk about this a bit, since we randomly did push the show back a day. What have you seen? What are your thoughts on this thing?
Well, I think if we just apply standard logic about the things we know against the things we see, we know this is false. We know what ISIS is. We know what the Taliban were. We know what Al-Qaeda are. These are constructs. These are, straw man enemies that have been invented out of thin air, and it's kind of ingenious in a way, because this particular kind of terrorist enemy, that never goes away. That's a war that, one day you don't just wake up and say, oh, we won the war against terrorism. This goes on and on and on.
Right.
But it's pretty clear from the date, Friday the 13th, there's clear connections to the Knights Templar, the whole story about them being wiped out, or at least partially wiped out on this date. So there's a Masonic link there, a secret society link there. But what concerns me the most is that this is really kind of getting out of hand. You can tell that they're kind of teeing up for some big end game. And I'm trying to figure out how to even phrase this. What's going on now is the media is so controlled that there's really no way to counter that kind of communication when it's going out internationally, these fake, false events, for people like you or I to even get any kind of a platform to try to explain to people that this is just shenanigans. But at the end of the day, there it is. It is shenanigans, and it's global at this point, and it's occurring an awful lot.
Yeah. Well, well said. I never really watch the news anymore unless something like this happens, and then I'll turn it on just to see what they're saying, try to extrapolate some kind of information from the official narrative. And I've already heard 2 reporters say that they found Syrian passports near the bodies of these terrorists. And that right there, it seems like the big plant. If you ask me, this is a play to make all of Europe afraid of those refugees. And I have had some off-air conversations with guests about these Syrian refugees flooding into Europe, and most smart people that I've talked to have gotten me to think that it seems like the elite are trying to get rid of Europe's social programs. They're like the last place on the planet where the populations get good social programs. And they have more than anywhere in the world. And a flood of immigrants coming in to stress the system and make it crash or make people feel like there's a lot of freeloaders. This is what I think the elite are trying to do. They're trying to get rid of those social programs, and this is how they're doing it. And they're going to manipulate the European people into a conservative, right-wingish mindset, get them to hate these immigrants and now fear them as terrorists too, thinking that anyone who's come in from Syria because of this Syrian passport link might be a ticking time bomb. Eventually, Europeans are going to ask for the social programs to be taken away. That is what I think is happening based on conversations with people who don't really want to go on the record.
Well, it's funny. At the base of all these kind of false propaganda made up out of thin air violence events that we see, just kind of spewing out of the news all the time, at the very base, it's about us and them. It's about turning neighbors against neighbors, human beings against human beings, this country against that country. And it's just sows seeds of discord. And the truth is it's all made up. It's basically a mind weapon. It's exactly that. It's a mind weapon that keeps everybody kind of suspicious of everybody else. And then the tragic part of it is they buy into things like, look at the Patriot Act. After 9/11, how many people stood up and said, no, this is a bad thing. And yet we watched so many rights just dissolve after that false event. So it's a takeover is what it is. I mean, eventually they're going to have so many pieces in place on the chessboard, it's going to be very difficult to do anything about it.
Yeah, man. And France's president came out and said France was now going to engage in a pitiless war against the terrorists. And that's exactly like what you were saying. It is pitiless because you're waging war on an idea, not a nation. There's nowhere to defeat all terror, especially when it's funded and armed by the CIA and probably Israel too. And fighting a pitiless war has really worked out great for America the past 15 years, hasn't it?
There's a new movie out, and I don't really pay to watch movies, but I did see the trailer for a movie. I hope I get this correct. I think it's called what is it? Conflict is Our Brand, or hold on, that's not quite right. Shoot, I can't remember, but it's a Sandra Bullock movie. And when I saw the trailer, it really kind of summed up what we're looking at. The name of the movie and the kind of trailer that is demonstrating that anything they do is okay as long as it's not failure. And with the terrorism thing, it's on call. They can ring that up any day of the week and have that kind of conflict ready to be used against the minds of the people of planet Earth. And it's a sad thing. You traveled to Europe, and I would be willing to bet that you met a lot of nice people, and the impressions that you have of that part of the world are probably much different than the folks who sit in front of their TV and collect their information that way. God, I wish I could remember the name of that movie because
I just looked it up. It is called Our Brand is Crisis.
There it is. Our brand is crisis. That sums up exactly what we're looking at. They create a crisis. That is their brand. All these kind of gun incidents, violence, terrorism, it's all the same thing. And it is their brand. And what their brand does is it creates crisis to push forward an agenda. But in the meantime, it's really turning people against people. At the base of it, they have to have the animosity out there so that they can move forward with whatever the heck the next thing they want to do is. And at this point, it's really nonstop. People, who are running shows like you, and I'm about to launch my podcast, we're going to be the last vestiges of people who have any ability to speak up against what is going on.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, I think that's true. And I guess if we were to move on a little bit from this recent thing in Paris, you just finished an epic skywatching road trip that we talked about you going on last time you were here. Tell us a little bit about that. How was it, man?
It was, it's a great thing to see that much of the country all in one shot. Unfortunately, when I left San Diego, I headed to Utah to see the Arches National Monument first thing, and I had permission to set my scope up in there all night, so I was really excited to do it, but weather hit. And so instead of breaking out my scope, I used my full spectrum camera to film electrical storms coming through. So as we headed north, the weather followed us all the way to Michigan. But when I was in Michigan, I had to laugh because you and I have done shows on Hattie Bob, and you're aware of what James has kind of uncovered, where Hattie Bob says that the main place you will find terrestrial UFOs is the Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. The one clear night I had there, my mind was boggled. I mean, the sky was just full of these very bizarre lights and crafts, and not your typical there's a point of light in the sky. And I was so bummed when I realized that my DSLRs just were not up to the task of filming in such low light conditions. I put night vision on my wish list for the future. But it's funny, there's another part of the Hadibov saga that James is unraveling that is spot on. I mean, those skies are full of what can only be described as UFOs. Some of them even look like they're going into the lake.
Yeah, that is super interesting, man. I love to see the connections pan out like that. But you mentioned the full spectrum camera. You did get some new equipment too that you've gotten that has made you able to pick things up that you couldn't before, right?
So that is the full spectrum camera. I've had it for a while, and what I can do with it is, say I'm looking at the moon, I can set like auto ISO and auto lighting so that when I pull off the moon, it lights up the sky in a way that a typical camera would not. And what it's allowed us to do is film, a number of interesting things that probably would not have been picked up only in visual spectrum, but it's allowed us to track a few things that go across, between me and the moon. It's allowed me to track them further than the moon in a handful of instances. So it's been a great tool to have.
Nice. Yeah, I did see one of your videos recently where you did seem to capture a celestial body that is not visible in the human light spectrum. I thought that was pretty wild. Where was that about in the sky? Do you have any idea what size it was?
Yeah, that was a crazy thing. That was down in Virginia, I think is what you're referring to, and that was on the road trip. From Michigan forward all the rest of the way, I did film the sky, but primarily it became about chemtrails. Typically to get other interesting things, you just put in weeks of filming to get other things. But we were filming chemtrails in Virginia, and I've never seen anything like the chemtrailing that goes on there. I mean, it is staggering. My heart goes out to the people who live there. It's so bad. But we were filming, and I had managed for the first time to get a chemplane in the aperture of my telescope and track it for about 7 minutes, which is very difficult. While we were doing this, I saw what I thought was an orb, and we were filming with the full spectrum camera, so I went and I watched it. Well, it became pretty apparent that we couldn't see it with our eyes, so we got out star maps. The sun wasn't quite down, and so we got out star maps and stellarium, and there should have been nothing bright like that in the sky. Well, as the sun went down, we spotted Saturn, and this thing was brighter than Saturn, yet we could not see it with binoculars, with our eyes, nothing. So, yeah, the full spectrum camera picked that thing up, and it was just like this very slow drifting, round, well-lit orb that was only probably, if I had to guess, it was IR that I picked up the most light with, but it was brighter than Saturn. So, crazy.
Damn, yeah. Do you think that was something more like ship-sized or planet-sized?
I think it has to do with the chemtrails. I filmed so many orbs, and that was my initial reaction to it. But the fact that we couldn't see it other than using the full spectrum camera was what stuck out.
Yeah.
And what's really kind of stunning is when we could see Saturn, I filmed it, and that was brighter than Saturn. So I think it was, at the level of the high level chemtrails. I don't know what it is. Is it an eye in the sky? It was slowly drifting, but clearly parked there doing something.
Well, that kind of jives with Hadibov too. The idea that these workers in the system, these manipulators of the environment, they're right outside of our view. I mean, that kind of makes sense. Our light spectrum is pretty narrow compared to the whole range of possibilities, and it wouldn't be hard for an advanced being to use that against us, really.
It wouldn't be hard for a human being to do that. It's so well known. If anyone goes online and looks up the visual spectrum, they'll see what a small sliver of light it is that our eyes see. So even just pushing slightly into IR or UV quickly goes beyond what we can see. And the funny thing is my camera doesn't go that far into either spectrum because the rules changed some years ago about, what you're allowed to have.
Really?
Actually, in the 70s, it was easier to get more powerful tools to go further into the invisible spectrums, UV and IR. But yeah, I think it's probably child's play for those folks to put something up that's, only reflects IR or UV.
Yeah, that in and of itself is interesting, that the the rules changed, the laws changed about what you can get your hands on. I mean, what's there to hide in the invisible spectrum, unless you're there messing around with it?
Well, if I remember correctly, some of the rules that I had read recently, looking back at when that changed, cited military applications flat out, that they didn't want people having them because it would interfere with, military security.
Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned Saturn. I noticed that you did film Saturn from both coasts, and it looks really, really strange. I didn't expect it to look so much like an eye. I mean, the rings and the planet inside the ring looks just like an eye, and the rings come out just as bright as the planet itself. But it was a complete mirror image, like a 180 flip to the angle from the west coast to the east coast. And that kind of struck me as odd. I mean, is that what you would expect to see?
It's odd, and I should have described it better in the video that I posted, because people had come and, implied that I had shot one way on the west coast and another on the east. And then some of the smarter astronomers pointed out that it was probably later at night. So as the sky had kind of arced around, that was the appearance. But the truth is, I was shooting in alt-azimuth, not polar aligned in both cases. There were, 2, 3, I forget, I'd have to go back and look, but 2 or 3 months between the shooting. But the thing is almost all my work that I post online, I would say probably 90% of it that's not daytime shooting, is shot between about 8:30 and 10:30. So when I went back and looked at the clips, there is a 3-hour time difference the way we use clocks on the ground. But the point is, there's no way that they were more than an hour different at the time of night that they were shot. So the rotation of the sky didn't account for it. So yeah, it's when I saw it, I thought, wow, people would love to see this, particularly the people that are trying to kind of redescribe what they think, this world's all about.
Right. That's the angle I was going. That seems interesting from that perspective of, if we're challenging the traditional paradigm of the Earth's environment, you should expect to see things play out a certain way, and then sometimes you'll see something like this image of Saturn that it doesn't seem like it should be a complete 180. It seems like you should be somewhere around maybe a 20 to 30 degree change, but I just don't know. Maybe it's really complicated and over my head, but I've been going on these international flights, and I've been thinking about this too, and trying to get my bearings in the air about where I am in relation to how the planet's supposed to be and how the things in the sky are supposed to be. And it's just really tough to wrap your mind around it and to really undo or even challenge something that is so cemented in your head.
Even the clock alone is a funny thing. Where we live, they change it at both equinoxes. They knock it off by an hour. But that small hour shift has a massive effect on us. Like if you see a rat in your yard, that rat has been unaffected because he doesn't look at a clock. It absolutely no change in his daily existence. But us human beings that are looking at clocks, it has a massive effect. And I was thinking about this the other day because I think I did an article where we were talking about the weaponization of music, and it's only 8 cycles a second that was changed. So it's a very minuscule change that has had kind of a profound effect on, our music experience when we listen to music. And the time is no different. Most people really comment, in the spring when the clock changes, that it takes quite a while to get used to it again. And then sure as heck, here comes the other equinox right about when you're used to the time change, and they do it to you again. And it just kind of, to me, demonstrates how powerful little small changes in the patterns of our lives can be.
Yeah, I agree. Just get us 1 degree off of harmony, and I think it does have a real nagging effect on our subconscious, on our energy systems, all that kind of stuff. And you mentioned the eclipse. You have a video talking about the blood moon and eclipse lies. Talk to us about what that's about. What's the real deception there?
Well, at the base of what I was trying to point out is the idea of a blood moon is just simply, it's almost directly related to the Paris attacks. It's just this kind of ghoulish, violent language, blood, being introduced to the moon, and the moon has no blood type. There's no call for that. But on the face of it, if you look at what they're saying by their own rules, which I don't accept, we are told that the color of an eclipse is going to be created by all the sunsets and sunrises on the planet. And since we all know you can't predict what a sunrise or a sunset will look like, there's no way they could predict what they're going to call a blood moon, which implies very red. And by the way, of the last handful of eclipses, none of them have looked anything near what I would describe as blood. But the first thing I was pointing out is it's just this ghoulish kind of violent language that they constantly insert into everything. And, I'm trying to remember which clip was the last one I did, because I've done a few on eclipses that point out that they're manipulated events. This last one came into view for us on the West Coast as it was approaching totality. And the cool thing about this one was when an object that you're looking at through a telescope is close to the horizon, you're looking through so much kind of heat transfer and junk in the air and more air because you're looking through a deeper section of it. It makes the viewing terrible. So when I had my visual spectrum camera on it, it was almost worthless. But my full spectrum camera allowed me to see any portion of the moon through the entirety of the eclipse. And that was very cool. A normal camera would have seen like a blacked out portion as the eclipse, got going. But with the full spec camera, I could look right through that shadow and see the surface features of the moon.
Yeah, that is awesome, man. And you've also, I guess, everybody knows your crowning achievement is the lunar wave, but as I understand it, it's been filmed, I guess, twice now by people at times that you've predicted. Like, we've talked in the past about there being a pattern to the lunar wave, and now it seems like that's being backed up by people actually capturing it those times. What have you learned about this pattern?
So, it's pretty clear at this point that if we film the moon near the equinoxes, when it's coming near to full, probably Hattie Bob's description of third phase or better is a good rule of thumb. But what I did was I went back and I looked and used the experience that I had in trying to film the lunar wave. The first time I did it was in the spring equinox of, was it 2015 or 2014? I can't remember. At any rate, I predicted a time range, and Randy in Houston filmed it within that time range. This last one that we just had, the fall equinox in September, I did the same thing, and the time range that I predicted was from the 20th to the 30th, with the equinox kind of falling, I forget what it was, 23 or 26, I don't remember the exact day. But as fate would have it, Richard 205 Maria, who's filmed the wave 5 times now, nailed it on the first night of the prediction, the 20th. So, it kind of really goes a long way to showing that there is something here valid to look at. If I have misdescribed it or made assumptions that are incorrect, I think that the predictions that were made and then fulfilled should demonstrate to everyone there's a good reason to take the lunar wave seriously and to try to learn more about it.
Yeah, now you've got this like coalition of moon filmers that you're working with and you speak with regularly. And are their conclusions the same as yours? Are they looking at the moon and seeing this and coming to the same idea that it's some kind of facade?
I think we're all pretty varied on what we think. I think a couple of us have similar opinions to what I have shown on YouTube, but I know for a fact that, say, Houston Skywatch, he's looked at Japanese research about sound waves and gravity waves and all these other things. And Randy, I don't think he's outright stated that he agrees with my assessment, but I kind of feel like he's in that ballpark. But to be honest, of the 4 people who are kind of in contact with any regularity, and all of us but one having filmed the wave, there are some differing opinions. And to be honest, people are just simply trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the weirdest things that I think has come out in recent years. And I love that so many people are catching on to it. And I love the Hattie Bob material and how it jives in. And when you see things that validate that, it's even more exciting. Another thing in that same thread is you filmed some UFOs, I think one in particular, the day before the wave, which sort of backs up Hattie Bob too.
That's right. And that's happened more than once. Even in the 2012 footage, 4 seconds, you know what, I should just quit quoting numbers because I'm not good at remembering them. A very few seconds after the lunar wave begins, a little shadowy type object goes across the upper left limb of the moon. There's another lunar wave that I filmed that has this same kind of thing going on. I believe it's Richard 205 Maria has one or two captures that had objects on the same night. And I think all of us may have filmed, of the three of us that I'm speaking about that have caught the lunar wave in the United States, all of us have caught objects within the vicinity of the lunar wave a day before or a day after.
It's so interesting. Have you seen any other strangeness in your moon filming specifically? I think recently you've seen some lights and pulses that are fairly weird, right?
Yeah, that was a very strange thing because my wife had been filming one night and she filmed that vortex thing that we talked about, I think, last time we talked. But we were filming one night with the full spectrum, and where I tend to keep the telescope kind of zeroed out, centered on the moon to improve my odds, she always likes to move it around. And even before we had the full spectrum, she was using auto lighting to do similar things that we can do better now. But we had taken the moon and put it way down in the corner of the frame, so the auto lighting is overexposing the disk of the moon but brightening the sky all around it. And there were two occasions that night where these weird pulses, it looked like almost lights coming from behind the moon or something, just flared up. But in that same clip, there's all these little very ghostly, I don't even know how to describe them. They almost look like little ghosts kept kind of plummeting into the upper right limb of the moon. And, we have no way to know the distance, but it's unusual that it was the same spot of the moon this was occurring. But I think that's the clip you're referring to.
Yeah, man. And another thing, I guess I'm going to have to stop saying I've never seen anything weird in the sky since that big mysterious glowing thing that everyone was blowing up about the other day. I was lucky enough to see it in the sky. It reminded me of the Norway spiral a lot, mainly because of its color and its movement, but it was a huge bubble of glowing greenish light with a laser-like line of bluish light of a much brighter color in the middle. And I only caught the middle and the end of the event, but it hung in the sky for a good 7 to 10 minutes, and we watched it dissipate out over the West Coast. Now, they're saying it was a Navy missile launch of a fairly conventional type, but I'm not convinced. Just because they come out with an official story doesn't mean that's the truth, of course. There was no sound or exhaust trail associated with this. I'm willing to buy that it was a military test, but it was something way more exotic than they're telling us.
Well, my wife happened to have witnessed the whole entire thing and had a perfect view of it. And it was funny because you sent me two images right when it happened. Here's the things that I noticed. And the problem with events like this is if anyone's going to make really solid statements, you really have to put aside some time to really look into it. So I'm stating outright that I'm in the middle of a big moving out of a place that I've been for 10 years. So I have not had time to really focus on what was going on there and correlate it. But I spoke with you straight out of the gate. I spoke with my wife, and both of you mentioned spiral. And then I've spoke with a number of other people. So the whole idea of a spiral was clearly in eyewitness minds. The thing that's really weird about it is you sent me the images pretty quickly after you took them. I had, which is another weird thing, I'm moving. I had a small TV hooked up, and the news was on, and I don't listen to the news, but KUSI, the local news, was already covering it moments before you sent me those images. It seemed very in concert, and the real funny thing was that Houston Skywatch had sent me the link that I sent you, saying that the airports were not going to be allowed to put flight traffic in that area, which struck me funny in the first place anyhow, because the military is now bossing around, all of us civilians and the things we use to move around. But the whole thing struck me as very in concert with the media. And there's one common sense thing that a lot of people overlook. Now, this was reported as being seen all the way to Phoenix, I believe, and in Nevada as well. Had this occurred 1 hour earlier, there would have been so much sun glow that nobody would have, been able to see it.
Yeah.
Not, at least not in the way it was seen. So it really makes you question what's going on. But I think it's pretty clear that there is some very exotic, high-tech thing going on. And there's a lot of talk of portals and other things. And I think that is probably a good foundation to look into this from, because I know for a fact some of the people I speak with are trying to correlate it with huge energy releases out of these accelerator areas. Apparently that happened, the one in Norway. There's a claim that CERN put off a bunch of energy, and now there's a claim that I'm not sure if it's an accelerator or a lab up in Northern Cal somewhere, a similar thing where all this energy bursts at the same time. So it's an interesting thing. And when I have time at some point, I'm going to go back and try to correlate some data through time.
Yeah, man. And it doesn't take me much to doubt an official story of something. It's almost a Pavlovian response at this point to just assume that they're lying. But I do have a lot of friends that don't buy into what gets sold here on the higher side. And so we just don't talk about it much. And one of these friends actually texted me the other day saying, hey man, a good friend of mine who just got out of the Navy actually works on some of these missile programs and said that there's no way that what people saw in the sky was related to that. And he gave me her contact information. I haven't really done anything with it because I'm not surprised that it has nothing to do with the missile programs. But it is interesting that there is that little anecdotal evidence that popped up in my life too.
You know what's funny is I immediately started looking at the footage that was available. And one of the things I noticed out of the gate was we live on one of the most densely populated coasts, so there's no way that was not filmed by Lord knows how many people, probably thousands.
Right.
If you go on YouTube, you can't find that. The search returns will not give you that many views of what went on. But anyone has taken the time to go look at what a Trident missile launch looks like and then compare it to the video or speak with the eyewitnesses, it's pretty clear that those are two different things. And the other thing is, of the people I spoke to, the point of light that was involved with this came to a full stop as the kind of spiral or the glow went on and then moved on. In my wife's experience, she felt like she was looking right down the throat of a vortex. Now, if you look at the shape of the California coast, how it kind of bows out, and you look at some of the footage that was taken up the coast, it's more of a side-on view. So, I mean, I think there's real merit to looking into some kind of a portal or, something to that effect. I think that that might be a rabbit to chase.
Yeah, man, these are strange times indeed. I know since we've last spoke on air, I interviewed that Harold Kautzvella fella, and he has some pretty radical ideas about chemtrails and the idea that they're putting nanoparticles in the air and that this is causing some people to get Morgellons, and that Morgellons is the actual rooting of small spider-like entities that are basically coming out of people in strange ways. And it seems related. And again, I thought it was very interesting that of all the possible infinite types of characteristics you could use to describe these beings, these little things he's talking about, spider-like is what comes up,
Well, it was funny because I think, this started going on before I even went on my vacation in August. So people were pinging me saying, you got to go look at this Vela guy. And at the time I was getting ready, packing up. I didn't have a lot of time, but I know for a fact that these people were saying, I've been sending the Hattie Bob stuff to him, the lunar wave stuff to him, and all these other things. By the time I got back, it wasn't long, you had a show up with him. And what struck me as funny is when you asked him about Hattie Bob, he disavowed any knowledge. And I know there were probably 30 or 40 people hitting me, telling me they had sent him the information on Hattie Bob. So I took some time and listened to some of the things he was saying, and I've got to be completely forthright. Where I'm headed in life, I think, is a different highway. I just don't. It seems like all the right notes are being struck, but in all the wrong ways. That was my impression.
Well, you mentioned doing a lot of chemtrail work, and in one of your videos, you said you've learned a lot about them just from this one road trip. How has your understanding of chemtrails advanced? I would say the footage you have, that zoom in, it seems very clear that it's not cloud formations. It's very clear that there is some spraying going on. That is one thing that's pretty amazing. But what else would you say you've learned?
Well, for one thing, it's going on everywhere. When I was in the middle of nowhere, because I have a trained eye and I had a telephoto, which helps, I could see the remnants and in a couple occasions the planes that were actually doing it. When I got into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is pretty much the definition of the middle of nowhere, there was chemtrail activity. Not a lot, but it was visible. And then on occasions over Lake Michigan, we could see quite a bit of activity. Now, as I hit the big population centers on the East Coast, it was full on. And this is what stunned me. as I headed south from New England and got around Washington, D.C., the chemtrailing just picked up to a level that blew my mind. I was staggered. There is no time of the day while I was there when this was not going on at low, mid, and upper levels. And when I got down to Virginia, and you're talking about the telescopic footage I got of the plane for 7 minutes, I don't even know how to describe it. And there's big military bases in Norfolk and other areas that weren't too far from where I was. So what I learned was that the big population centers are absolutely getting hit harder than areas, say, in the middle of the country, maybe Oklahoma or Kansas or the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but they are not exempt. It is going on everywhere. And I also noticed that when I was up in New England in some of the kind of probably higher education areas, it was a much more covert effort, the chemtrailing, than when I got down to Virginia, where it was just balls to the walls, flat out, in your face, unreal chemtrailing. And, I've said this 1,000 times now, but the people there state they have not seen a sunrise or a sunset in over 2.5 years due to the chemtrailing.
I find that so interesting because when I was in Paris in this vacation, we spent a few days there, we had a really great view. One of our walls was almost just a window, and you could see the sunrise. It woke us up every day. And the thing is as soon as the light started to form, as soon as it got to be those bright orangey reds, shortly after, there were a bunch of chemtrails in the sky, and it looks gray. And I actually got a picture of it because the first time I just took a picture of the sunrise because it looked nice. And then not a half hour later, I was like, wow, all I can see now is chemtrails. And I took another picture, and it's crazy that I think that holds up. There's something going on there. And when I was in Armenia, it was interesting because I did see planes flying around, and I didn't see chemtrails. And I remember thinking, well, if people usually say these are contrails, if that's the typical excuse, because they're forming when planes are flying at certain altitudes and it's a natural effect, it should happen anywhere.
Right.
So for me to not see it in Armenia, even though there are planes flying around, I thought this is very strange. Yet every more industrial nation seems to have this big problem with people not being able to see the sky.
Well, there was another aspect. As I left Virginia and we were kind of headed to New Orleans, and then we were taking the very southern route back to San Diego, we got in areas where the sky looked decent. On a whole, when I went through in 2010, there were places like in New Mexico where the sky was so blue it almost hurt your eyes. I didn't see that anywhere on this trip. I saw a lot of dingy sky, but when I was in Georgia, and we were traveling, I was looking in the rear view as the sun rose, and there was no blatant evidence of chemtrails, but as soon as the sun got up high enough to be in those oranges, you could see that the sky was smudged out right where the sun was coming up. Now, this happened every single day, all the way back to San Diego, both at sunset and at sunrise. And it's a really strange thing because you'll be looking around for evidence of them spraying because I want to film this. And then all of a sudden, it's the light of the sun that really allows you to see this concentration. And to the right of the sun, to the left of the sun, some altitude above where the sun is, there's blue sky or seemingly blue sky. Yet right where this is all going down at sunrise and sunset, there's just this ugly smudge blocking basically being able to see the sun go down or come up.
Yeah, it's so weird. What do you think is behind this? I mean, I hear a lot of cutting-edge physicians and nutritionists talking about the importance of vitamin D and how it actually affects the length of our lives with the telomere length of DNA. Do you think it's something that has to do with keeping us from absorbing a proper amount of vitamin D, or could it be something else?
I think it's, in a lot of cases, I think it's all of the above. The big problem with chemtrails is in some of the groups that are really kind of trying to stand up against them, there's some really outlandish claims made, and I don't think that helps. Matter of fact, I think it hurts because people who are not experienced that there is such a thing called chemtrails see this kind of crazy claims and they walk away shaking their head. But if we know anything about the kind of ruling class of this planet, everything they do has multiple purposes. At times you see things go on where it's almost hard to imagine that a human being was smart enough to orchestrate the whole thing. So yeah, I think it's probably blocking vitamin D or sunlight. I think it's adding pollutants into the sky. I think it's doing any number of things. The real problem here is making a claim is one thing, proving it is a whole other thing. What we can prove is there is absolutely aerosol spraying going on. So at the base of things, I think that's really where people need to come together and make a stand. And at the other base of things, we know for a fact that it's pollutants, heavy metals, strontium, aluminum. Help me out here. What's the other one?
Barium.
Yeah. There's three that are commonly there. There are things that we know for a fact. They are spraying. There are heavy metals, and that is pollution. If your car was putting these things out, you wouldn't be allowed to drive your car.
That's a good point, especially in California.
Yep.
Another interesting thing that happened since your road trip and since we last talked is you got quite a bit of media coverage, it seems, and even Richard Hoagland called you out as a NASA plant.
I guess that is the pot calling the kettle black, considering that gentleman actually worked for NASA. But it was funny because not long after that, the History Channel called and wanted me to be a reoccurring guest on some new show they're doing. And it was kind of funny, too, because the producer that called me kind of mumbled under his breath when I asked him what channel it was. And when I said, the History Channel, you mean? And he said, yeah. I started laughing so hard that it kind of ended the conversation. But to get back to Hoagland, a producer of Hoagland's called me because they wanted to do a show. And I said, well, I guess, but I mean, is this a hit piece? Last I heard, he was calling me a NASA operative. And the producer told me he wasn't even aware that Hoagland had said that. And I said, really? Because that went out in print in Newsweek, so it was kind of hard to imagine. But the funny thing is, as I said, I'm more than willing to go on Hoagland's show and do something with him and talk, as long as it's not an attack piece. And he said, well, I'll get back with Richard and I'll get back to you. And he never did. The irony here is this. If anything about my lunar work is correct, it invalidates everything he's done. But by the same token, if any of the work he's done is correct, it invalidates what I've done. So it would have been a really interesting show.
It's a shame that might not occur. He will not come on my show. I'm probably just not big enough for him. A lot of these older guys, they're used to doing the rounds on specifically Coast to Coast and a couple other shows, and that's just where they stay. So I don't consider that to be anything super strange, but it is weird. He seems to be like the official out there guy for all this stuff. It's like if there's going to be a show, like for example, Alex Jones was on The View. If The View wants to sound like they're having a really conspiratorial viewpoint, they've got the one guy to give that to them. And then he makes it seem crazy and everybody just laughs at conspiracy theorists. Richard Hoagland, I think, fills in a similar gap when it comes to the space conspiracies and that kind of stuff. But, what do I know?
Well, it was funny because the guy from Newsweek, when he first contacted me, this was all in the tail of me saying that the Pluto mission was complete BS, just, stagecraft. Gizmodo picked me up, then the Daily Mail in the UK, and then Newsweek calls me. And so I'm talking to this guy, and I said, I'm happy to do an interview if you'll assure me that it's not just going to be a hit piece. It turns out he was one of the fairest. I got some of the most fair treatment from this man, Max, that I've had from any of the really interviews that I've done, other than folks like you who are a bit more open-minded. But I contacted him after he ran the print part in the Newsweek magazine, and I thanked him. I said, I would have paid you to get that Hoagland quote, because, I mean,
yeah,
that alone to me is a badge of honor.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. It's just interesting to see the radars that you've gotten onto in the past few years. I mean, when Newsweek's running shit, Richard Hoagland's talking about you. I think that's awesome. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Well, it's funny, too, because at one point, like a year and a half ago, someone named Mike Barra was on my YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. And it dawned on me, is this the Mike Barra that did what's the name of the book Hoagland did? Dark Matter or Dark
Mission.
Dark Mission, there you go. And I had actually read that back in the day, and I approached him on my channel, and I said, wait a minute, are you the Mike Barr that did the book with Hoagland? And he disappeared.
Yeah, Mike has been on the show before in the past, and yeah, they just have a really narrow sliver of things that they're willing to entertain that are considered fringe. And when you bring in other possibilities and other ideas and other anomalous things in space, they just kind of laugh at you the same way that a conventional thinker would. And it's like, well, you're really only allowing people to talk about this thin sliver of things, like the face on Mars, being a big one. I don't know. It's weird. Maybe it reinforces a traditional paradigm. Maybe it steers people. Who are looking for lies, it steers them in the wrong direction.
Well, I can add this. People often ask me, do you think you're doing anything that matters? Yesterday, well, let's go back a little bit. A couple National Geographics ago, people who don't believe that we ever went to the moon were on the cover to be belittled of National Geographic magazine, which is an international publication, probably one of the last print publications that has much circulation. But yesterday, I saw 3 shows on TV, one of which I believe yesterday was aimed at kids, reinforcing, showing the Apollo astronauts landing on the moon, doing the whole reinforcing this lie. Today, same thing. 3 more shows, and 2 of them were aimed at children. And to me, this is proof positive that what we're doing is making a huge difference, because they are scrambling to reinforce that lie, and they're really stepping up their efforts. And people like Mr. Hoagland, they put on the veil of, I hate NASA, NASA lies, but really what they're doing is reinforcing the underlying ideas of what the Apollo mission was all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, since we last talked, NASA has had a real aggressive series of announcements, the Pluto ones that you mentioned, also about meteors, about Earth-like planets. Do you feel like they're making more announcements than usual? Might they be trying to reinforce that traditional paradigm that so many researchers are finding flaws with all of a sudden?
Sure. And, here's a prime example of how you cannot separate media, news, NASA, any of it, our information sources. The announcement for Mars probably having water came out on a Friday, I believe. Or at least that's when I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
No, wait a minute. I think I'm getting this backwards. It was a Monday, and it was pre-announced, but I think the big announcement came on a Monday. That Friday, the new Matt Damon movie about him going to Mars was released on a Friday, so a week later. So what you see is this complete construct. The space that NASA has given us is a complete construct. It's, for lack of a better term, BS. They have not told us the truth about what's above the blue sky we see. And you can easily, logically work out when you see what's being presented in Hollywood, what's going out in the news, and what you just mentioned, where they really start stepping up all these amazing things like, we're landing on a comet, we're finding an Earth-like planet. It goes on and on and on. And I think you've hit it on the head. It's exactly what it is. It's just more propaganda to kind of hold up the lies that they've been telling all along.
Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned with the blood moon language they use, they also use a lot of symbolic language that has to do with death and has to do with ancient Egypt. It's very strange. But again, they're not naming these things enlightening, positive, inspiring messages. It is all kind of death, destruction, and demonic terms. And it's weird.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if that was a portal that you saw the other night, what the hell's coming in? But really on a serious note, it is. Words have meaning. We say this all the time. Maybe a little bit later we'll talk a little bit about language to help people learn how to decipher what you're alluding to here. But one of the things that was funny is I was calling Pluto out. Initially I had done this offhand clip where I just showed the moons of Jupiter that I had shot from my backyard and then compared it to the total crap that we were getting from NASA, who was in space supposedly just a few million miles away, not 400 or whatever million I'm supposed to be away from Jupiter. So I just did this offhand clip. That's the one they latched onto. So I went back and did another clip because that was really low-hanging fruit. I had not put a lot of thought into the clip that got so much attention. And I put some thought into a clip to kind of demonstrate to people that the cartoon character from Disney, Pluto, came to us the same year that the planet Pluto was discovered. Disney was a Mason. All the astronauts were Mason. All the founders of NASA were, I just started to draw all these lines.
Right.
And I ended that clip with a painting from Don Dixon done in 79, where they commissioned an artist to do a picture of what they thought Pluto might look like. And at the time, it was all they could see was the dimmest of white dots in the sky. And he painted this picture that looks pretty much like what we're now being presented with.
Right.
So I closed with that image. But as I was digging through the research out in the Kuiper belt, it's like a belt, we are told, of objects beyond Pluto, there were two big ones that I guess rival the size of Pluto or something. But here's what they named them. They named one Santa and one Easter Bunny. And when I saw that, for me, it kind of encapsulates the whole NASA reason for being. Words have meaning. So are we talking about serious space exploration, or are we talking about Santa and the Easter Bunny? And for my money, that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about mind weapons. That's all the information from NASA is false constructs that's just being wholesale inserted into the consciousness of the planet.
Right. And when it comes to challenging NASA's paradigm, people are looking all over saying the Earth might not be what we've been told. The moon, of course, might not be what we've been told. So many things about our solar system and environment don't make sense. And I remember when I did have Eric Dubay on, a part of his flat Earth argument is about satellites. Of course, if the Earth was flat, satellites couldn't orbit the way they're supposed to. And when you try to Google a picture of a working satellite, you can't really find one. And the ones that they do show look like cardboard and tinfoil. But have you ever filmed orbiting satellites or gotten a good shot of one of the supposed 10,000 that are supposed to be up there?
Nope. There were two pieces of footage that I thought way back in the day might actually be satellites that we could ID. One was called Bright PL. The other one was called Picard. In the case of the Picard, I thought I had nailed it. The trajectory was about right. The speed was as close as I was ever going to come. And I had all this going for me, and I thought, wow, there really is a satellite I can film an ID. And then I read at the bottom of the paragraph that it was a microsatellite that was, 200-300 miles away from me. So the idea that my little telescope saw something that was a 1-foot cube from that distance instantly demonstrated to me that it could not be that satellite they were claiming existed. The Bright PL was another one where it was really close, and at the time I thought I was working on the assumption that I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. But here's the truth. It is easier to film a lunar wave than it is to film something you can call a satellite, an ID, transiting the moon. The reason transiting the moon is important is because to see a light, and like people say they see the ISS all the time, and I say, no, you didn't. You saw a light in the sky. That's what you saw. So the idea that you can see a light in the sky and then claim it was the ISS, to me, that's a pretty huge leap, a lack of imagination, because you can see lights in the sky any night of the week. But to pull this back to satellites, I have filmed an endless parade of things that I have posted on my YouTube channel, and I would say 98% of the things I have filmed fit the same description. They are black, they are round, and some of them look like they have halos. And Richard 205 Maria has filmed them. Randy in Houston has filmed them. There's any number of people who have confirmed that this is going on. But what's amazing about this is if you hold your arm out some night when you can see a full moon, just hold your pinky up at arm's length and you can cover the moon. You're looking at half a degree of sky roughly. So we are filming these things in this measly half a degree of sky, which really kind of tells you that there must be a heck of a lot going on up there. We just can't see it because the things we're filming are backlit by the moon. Mm-hmm. But to get back to your original question, no, satellites do not exist in the way they've been described to you. And in the high definition age, anything amazing that can be filmed will be filmed. And there is no real footage of an amazing satellite doing amazing things in space. You might think an astronaut on the ISS might poke a camera out the window and show us one of these 5,000 or 10,000 things in orbit that are supposedly there, but it's just another construct. Satellites don't exist as they have been described.
Yeah, I find that to be one of the most interesting bullet points in the whole NASA lies breakdown, because there's supposed to be tons of them up there, tens of thousands, and yet...
And broken ones, too. Tons of broken ones.
They never collide. They never fall to Earth. You can never see them. We never have footage of one. I don't know. It's so weird to me, especially when you look at the pictures that you can see are all these weird box-shaped things with solar panel-looking wings on them. And that looked okay in the 70s and the 80s and maybe even the start of the 90s. But once we started to get smartphone technology and we started to see the way things really are going, it's like, that doesn't even look like a computer. That doesn't look like anything. What is that doing?
No, it's a funny thing. You know, this is one of the logic games people can play. I mean, look at hot air balloons. What was the first one? Was it 1600 and something? That one in France that you always see pictures of?
Yeah, maybe.
You can look at any given thing like airplanes or motorcycles and watch the progression. Go look at hot air balloons and watch the progression. I mean, once people figured out that hot air rose, you would think there would have been a lot of flight on this planet, right? Or how about this? These supposed ancient people that made these megalithic structures that are just mind-blowing. Those people must have known that hot air rose. Why weren't they flying, you know? And so you see these big gaps in information, and satellites is right in the center of what we're talking about here. Just logically, none of it fits. And when push comes to shove, I've got thousands and thousands of telescope hours viewing and filming, and I have yet to film anything I can call a satellite.
That's fascinating, man, because I don't know anyone who's looked at the sky more than you, and I just think that's so odd. Well, it is about that time. I know before we go, you wanted to talk about YouTube censorship and that you've seen it ramp up and how this is actually driving you to get into the podcasting space. Talk to us about this a little bit. What have you seen with YouTube?
So right now, people who are running channels like mine, and maybe not as much mine as some of the people that I follow, are living in fear to say or put up videos on the things they think matter. And the fear is founded. It's well-founded fear. We're seeing things like 3 copyright strikes hitting a channel and taking it out overnight, and the source of those strikes from Pakistan or someplace in the middle of the world where you would never have a chance to fight against it. You're seeing channels get, there was a channel not too long ago that had an anti-war message that was apparently taken down. And someone told me, and I haven't checked this yet, that actually in the suggested guidelines or whatever they call the things for the users of Google, that you're not supposed to have anti-war speech. But personally, each time that I put up a video where I challenge NASA or any of these other things that I do, I live in fear that all these thousands of hours of work that I did to film and produce video and put it out for the people is in jeopardy at the whim of somebody who wants to put a strike on me or take the channel down outright and give 3 strikes all at once. With this in mind, I am launching my own podcast, and I am going to be striving to serve my own video so that I can talk about any damn thing I want. And I would point out, in the group of people who I follow, and I won't mention names, there have been 3 channels recently that were taken out, wholesale, out, all at once, and there are a couple others that are creating backup channels and getting strikes on both channels. It's a bit mind-boggling when you consider that I believe the Google servers are in California, which to me would suggest that the free speech that Americans think we grew up with should be observed to some degree, but it's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is a complete clampdown, and it just feels like it won't be long before where someone comes on and says, the Paris attack you saw last night was a lie. It was a false flag hoax that will just be eliminated from YouTube for having said that. So I probably didn't describe that too well, but there it is.
Well, no, I mean, we see the same thing with Facebook and even Reddit for some of the more tech-savvy listeners that are involved with Reddit. A lot of censorship and a lot of removal of posts. There was even those Europeans who were in California not long ago, and they said they were going to wreck LA, or they were going to destroy LA, and it's just like their term for partying. They were held, in custody for a while, and people are facing strange consequences for what is said online. For me, YouTube hasn't really been a huge problem, except that right out of the gate, they chopped off my AdSense and don't let me make any kind of AdSense money from the show that I put up on YouTube. But yet there are at least 2 different clone channels. They look exactly like mine. They're called as close as they can. Mine might be Higher Side Chats. Theirs is Higher Side Chats Podcast or Higher Side Chats Show. And they're full of ads. And I don't understand why I can't, put an ad at the beginning of my own content just in that YouTube format to get a quarter every view. But yet some guy can put ads every 10 minutes for an hour show. And I've filed complaints with AdSense with Google AdSense. I was like, hey man, this is my content. I normally wouldn't care, because who cares if someone watches it on my YouTube channel or another YouTube channel, but I say I'm against all these ads, and here's this guy putting in an ad every 10 minutes. That is hurting my message a little bit. That's the only reason I have a problem with it. But I can't get them to take the channel down, and I don't know why he can make money off my show and I can't.
It's actually worse than that in a way, because with AdSense anyhow, and I remember you and I had an email exchange where you were trying to figure out how to get a hold of them.
Yeah.
Not only are they doing anything they want, there is no place to contact them.
Mm-hmm.
So basically you're being kicked in the nuts by the hidden boot. You can't even identify who's doing it or email or call anywhere to try to address it. So, I mean, if you think of the things in our history that are supposed to have mattered, like taxation without representation, this is the ultimate form of taxation without representation. Here people work endlessly for hours trying to inform an audience of things they think are important, and at the whim of an unseen, unknown entity, you can have all your work removed with the push of a button, or you can have strikes or other hassle things put on you where you got to go take a class, and these other ridiculous things as if they had the power of, say, the DMV when you get a ticket. It's ludicrous. And not only that, I don't use Facebook, but I heard that Facebook, on the tail of this BS Paris attack, actually added something where people could go check to see if their loved one was safe.
Yeah.
And I would mention, not only is that ridiculous on the face of it, because if you had a loved one and you used Facebook, you would already be in contact with them. What they are doing is they're data mining that information, and it's almost certain that anyone who is using that is helping them to further pull off the fraud. But there it is, these big players. Today on YouTube, they had the French flag behind the YouTube logo.
Yep.
So, I mean, we don't really need to discuss any further why it's important for us to find another avenue where we can talk, because when you see fraud at that level being backed by YouTube, by Facebook, by all the national and local news agencies, there's a huge problem, and free speech is all but dead.
Yeah, and you got everybody changing their profile pictures to solidarity with Paris, and there's nothing wrong with sympathizing with people who've undergone a tragedy, but it does seem a little like sheepish behavior. It does seem like people are just following what's put out in front of them. And I've heard pundits again say that this attack in Paris is because these terrorists hate our freedoms. Well, if they really just hate our freedoms and our Western way of life, they would have wiped Amsterdam off the map a long time ago, man. I was just there. And, to see the red light district in person is something else, for sure. I mean, if this is just Muslim extremist activity, don't you think they'd attack a city full of marijuana coffee shops, bars, sex museums, and prostitutes in their underwear right out in public view? I mean, it doesn't compute. That's not what's going on here.
You know what's funny? Do you remember you and I did an interview where the kind of shark attack thing came up?
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
All right. So I was contacted on the tail of saying that was a bogus staged news event by someone who claimed to know the man who was killed by the shark. And so while every fiber of my being knows that what I saw in the news was just more shenanigans, I stopped and took pause to say, okay, if I am wrong and this person truly did know the person, then I need to apologize. And I need to do it in public. And so as I began to talk to this person, I realized very quickly that not only did they not know them, it was a friend of a friend thing. So then I just stuck to my guns and I pointed out all the reasons why it was no different than any other media fraud we see. And then I came to learn that this person contacted me, had come into this situation to help gather information on the supposed victim so that ESPN could make a nice show on the death of a man who was butchered by a shark. So you can kind of see how well enforced this kind of massive fraud that's going on. And, you know, it's just funny. At the end of that conversation, that person that contacted me, I called them out flat out. And they went away. They ran when I called them out flat out and said, this is BS. I know for a fact that was fake news. And they split. So, yeah, I mean, we live in one hell of a world. And if you're a person who's going to go on Facebook today and go find out if someone's safe in France, what I'm telling you is you are being herded like a sheep. And the information you are putting into Facebook is being used against the people on this planet in general to further the deception.
Yeah, it is. And I have the same kind of issue with the Boston bombing. I don't know anyone in particular who was hurt. I've seen a lot of footage that suggests that there's a lot of manipulation in that event, but yet
no one was hurt.
See, that's the thing. I don't know, but I know I can see some staged events. But there is a waitress who works at the Comedy Store who apparently has a close relative who lost a limb in that event. Now, again, it's several degrees removed, and people can tend to say things for attention. But it makes me wonder.
I'm calling BS, my friend. That nobody died, nobody got hurt. I mean, at what point do people quit excusing liars? Right? I mean, if everyone who's in the conspiracy world can pretty much agree that Sandy Hook was a total put on, if you can know that governments, that Washington, D.C., that police forces, that medical examiners, that fire departments, that all these people went and did this, how can you ever hear any news after that you accept on any level? That is the definition of being crazy, I think.
Right.
And so at this point, even though it seems cold and callous to say, nope, I'm not buying it, too bad. Right. You know what? We are not sheep, and we're not going to be herded by the fact that they're telling us people were hurt or killed. You got to do better than that now. You know, you really have to prove there's a problem in my mind now. Because that's what they're doing. They're using these events to herd a population of a world like a bunch of cattle to the slaughter.
I don't disagree, but isn't it possible that they staged a lot of things for the cameras with crisis actors and also planted bombs that blew up and killed a bunch of people?
No.
I mean, aren't both possible?
Not for me.
Okay.
Not for me. I'm not. I used to sit there dangling my toes thinking, you know, it's a very irresponsible thing to say, what if someone did get hurt? But the problem here is that I've been looking at these things going on for years now, and I've watched how it's shaped the planet. I would rather say nobody died and nobody got hurt and be wrong once every 100 times than to accept any of it. Because you've got to realize that any media establishment who has pushed these events have pushed fraud. That means they are no longer trustable. That means every single kind of crisis-y event that they put on, in my view, is unacceptable. And that's why I don't watch the news. I mean, you stated you don't watch it. Yeah. Well, why is it that we don't watch the news? That's exactly why we don't, because we don't want that garbage in our minds.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. Well, right on, man. It has been a great 2 hours, pretty much been all over the map. I'm really looking forward to being a guest on your new show. That seems very exciting. I think you're right. In podcasting, you have much more control over the openness of your show, as long as you avoid commercial advertising and joining any networks that have stupid rules. I think it's a great play. I'm sure it will be great. And until we do your show, I guess we can end it here. Thanks again so much for doing this, man. Of course, your YouTube channel is Crrow777. Anything else you want to leave the people with?
No, I think that's it. You know, Crrow777 Radio will be coming hopefully in December. And thanks so much for having me on again.
You got it, man. Take care. There we have it, people. Another Crow show in the bag. Always fun to check in with him. This time, We actually brought it down to earth and had quite a bit to talk about in the wake of the Paris attacks, or lack thereof. You know, I do respect the opinions of guests who find these events to be completely simulated stagecraft, but I'm sure a lot of you have noticed me asking the same semi-skeptical questions. I mean, maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but I'm 100% in agreement that when you examine the footage, it seems like we have crisis actors appearing in multiple tragedies. It seems like those people talking to the cameras are pretending to have had a tragic loss, and much of what we see seems to be rolled out in a tightly controlled way with footage that really looks fake. From bullets that look like they're firing blanks during the Charlie Hebdo crisis, from the cryptic messages around the Aurora and Sandy Hook shootings, to the moon landing, for Christ's sake. I mean, I can look at that footage and clearly see I'm being shown a forgery. That is not my point of contention. For example, the moon landing. You can look at the footage all day and say, this is not footage of us going to the moon. But you can't take that and say, we have never gone to the moon. Yes, there are things like the Van Allen radiation belt and a look back at the trajectory of technology, and it seems improbable, but you can't look at a piece of footage and determine the things that may or may not have happened off screen. That's really my issue, right there. You can't look at a piece of footage and be sure about things that happened off screen. And when I see the wild threads that people just bombard my Facebook with about how they're positive this was a complete fake attack and no one was hurt, I don't think that helps. So we have an event like Paris. And now that I've had a couple of days, I have seen some pretty wild things. There's that photo of a brown-haired young girl who seems to be at every false flag in the past 2 years. We also have this guy who was on the news saying that his cell phone saved him from shrapnel and then lets it slip that the news media was already on the scene. I mean, why would that be? I'm not arguing with the idea that everything we saw on TV is a fake. I'm only saying that doesn't mean real shots weren't fired and real bombs didn't go off. I'm not willing to say with certainty that nobody was hurt. The elite kill thousands of people a day worldwide with the biggest weapon in their arsenal, poverty. We all know they don't care about us. And this idea that they carefully simulate these events to keep people from getting hurt, it just doesn't really sound right to me. Setting off a bomb on street corner A and setting up cameras on street corner B to capture some particularly emotional footage and induce a certain feeling throughout the media, that makes sense to me. Create trauma and amplify it through the media using your carefully crafted footage. But there are much smarter people that I respect that would disagree with me. They think these are simulated events. From Crow to Lennon Honor and the Global Motion Picture Stage Show to Zen Gardner to Ale Demengard. All these guys think that nothing is really happening, and maybe it isn't, but I just can't say that. Except Sandy Hook. I'm pretty convinced that was a closed school. I see 9/11 as a false flag, but almost nobody is trying to say that people didn't die, you know? It's a small thing. But I just like to make my personal position clear, even if it is a little stuck in the details. But I see these researchers' points too. Why believe anything from liars? Why let them get to your emotions? Why not block out everything they're saying? Screw it. I mean, I respect that position, I do, and I'm not telling anybody what to think. Everybody needs to settle on what speaks to their gut. However, there's something about the ritualistic aspect to me that doesn't sit well, because we've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence and circumstantial evidence that shows that the elite are involved in ritual murder. Well, does the ritual still work if there's no murder at its core? Are they just creating trauma of the mind, or is there something deeper happening that involves the loss of life? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but that is sort of where I stand, yet flexible as ever, really. I definitely think these weren't random attacks or attacks put in motion by anyone but the top-down puppet masters for desired results that I mentioned in the conversation. And one very eerie ritualistic element I want to note here that I got from my main man Darren Williams, who always sends me interesting links and potential guests, is that we are told most of the deaths occurred in a death metal show. And we know the date was Friday the 13th, the anniversary of the Knights Templar being tortured and killed, which, at the heart of that, many say it was due to the power and wealth the Knights Templar were acquiring through their communication with demonic entities. That's what Tracy Twyman was all about, the Knights Templar communicating with Baphomet. Well, when this shooting broke out, it was during an Eagles of Death Metal concert. Just take out that last word, metal, and you have a title that I feel represents the political dynasties of the world pretty well, the Eagles of Death. That's point one. But what song are we being told they were playing on this Friday the 13th? According to the witnesses that the media gives us, the band had just said, "We love you, Paris," and then started the song, "Kiss the Devil." with the lyrics that start, "I met the devil, and this is his song." Then, boom, explosions. It's hard to know if we're having a true ritual described to us or if just relaying the story in that way is the ritual, but it's creepy either way. Anyway, so much other interesting stuff from Crow, who has never been able to film an orbiting satellite with thousands of skywatching hours. I find that to be really interesting. I want satellite proof. Maybe this is a silly thing, but it seems like proof should be way easier to find. And when it is, if it is, I'm sure I'll feel really stupid. But for now, I'm all about it. Crow also wanted me to add that if you have any filming equipment, we want everyone to get out there and try to film Venus passing behind the new moon on December 7th. We've had situations where it seems like the new moon can actually be seen through, and that jives with Hattie Bob as well. So this is the best shot we got. Can we see Venus through a transparent new moon? Only one way to find out, so let's do it on December 7th, people. So in the Plus show, we got into some really interesting conclusions that Crow has come to and the experiments that back it up. I really struggle with this one too, but he is not the first guest to say that the moon gives off its own light, that it is not the reflection of the sun as we're told. Why tell that lie? I don't know, but it is an interesting thing we've heard from more than one guest at this point. We also talk about Crow's experience and findings from visiting a NASA museum as well as St. George's Cathedral. And we talk about time control and manipulation, as well as this new chronology movement that suggests entire centuries of history have been made up by the Roman Catholic Church and others. I love it. I think it's a great show, and I hate that people only get to hear half the picture sometimes, but this is my job. And I hope that if I give you 5 hours of free work a month, you can tip me $5 for another 5 hours. I'd do it all for free if I could, but you know the drill. So please sign up at thehighersidechatsplus.com and join the THC party. We're very, very close to having an iPhone app now, from what I understand from the developer. The iPhone has been a thorn in my side because on Android, we got some very good third-party apps that work great for Plus, but the iPhone is lacking a free option. There's a couple options there that are $1 or $2.99, but that doesn't really work for me. I can't rely on that, and I can't tell you guys to go buy an app. So we're having one made, and I think we're getting close. And I'm getting a new laptop tomorrow, so I can be more active in the forums without being stuck at my office desk. I'm going to make a Q&A thread where Plus members can ask questions to me, and then maybe twice a month I'll sit down with a mic and answer them in a solo podcast form for the Plus people. So please get involved with that. Don't leave me hanging. I'm also going to make some threads called Making the Case For, and I hope we can just fill them up with the best evidence for various fringe ideas. Making the case that the moon landing footage was fake. Making the case that the news coverage of these events is fake. Making the case that the Masons run the world. Making the case that Jewish banking dynasties run the world. Making the case that reptilians exist. Making the case that the earth is hollow or flat, if you prefer. I envision just being post after post of articles and clips that stack up to make pretty credible cases for all these things and more. That's my vision. We'll see if it can be applied appropriately. I'm really going to try to pimp this forum. Sure, the Plus people get the longer show, but they've changed my life $5 at a time, and I want to give back a little more and get away from the bombardment of messages and comments that I get caught up in from people who really aren't contributing anything positive to my life at all. So that is the plan. Things will start rolling out quickly on that front, and that's it for me. Hope to see you there. We can talk about all this stuff and more, but that's it for me today. Your move, masterful manipulators of this ruse we call reality. Your frickin' move.
Crowwood, it's your show now. So what's it gonna be? 'Cause people will tune in to hear another new conspiracy. Almost too much of. We thought this was low. It's bad, getting worse. So where'd all the good people go? They're on the higher side chats 'cause it's everybody's favorite show. Where'd all the good people go? He got Jamar's gold and white, and then there's Crow. They talk this and that on the higher side chat. Testing 1, 2, now what you gonna do? Bad news, misuse, got too much to lose. Give me some truth, now whose side we on? Whatever you say, Turn on the boob tube, I'm in the mood to obey, so lead me astray. By the way now, where'd all the good people go? They locked him up, it seems, for protesting Monsanto. Where'd all the good people go? They're on the THC, my favorite show. Sitting down, new episode to hear. Wanna light a bowl, but I fear the police. Can you hear me? Can't interrupt me from this friendly conversation. Been waiting all week for THC. With the Crrow777, there's no hesitation. Exposing the truth, getting to the elite. Scams, schemes, conspiracies, and treason. It's an excellent show. What I need to know is where'd all the good people go? Been only getting hate and fear from all the other hoes. Where'd all the good people go? Guess that makes THC my favorite show. They talk this and that on the higher side, chat testing 1, 2. Now what you gonna do? Bad news, misuse, give me some truth. You got too much to lose. Whose side are we on today? Anyway, okay, whatever you say. Wrong and resolute, but in the mood to obey. Station to station, desensitizing the nation. Going